Okay, hello there. This is Father Moo back for another quick musical tip on the Nord Micromodular. So I said before in my last video, I just want to step away from the long stream, the 30-minute patch building stream that I usually do on the Nord Micromodular, and just boil it down to just a simple practical tip that you can use in almost any modular or even some semi-modular or standard synth applications. So we got a very simple thing today. It's not rocket science by any means, but if you never tried it before, it could be useful to you. I guess we'll find out if it is or it isn't. So let's just look at this little cliche that I've put together here. I say cliche because these are the things I always tend to fall back on. Once I've figured them out and figured that they work, I just use them over and over. In fact, I sometimes use them too much and have to tell myself, don't always do it that way. But I figure if it's useful to me this many times, it could be useful to some of you listeners out there in YouTube land. So let's look at the little simple patch I built. And man, is it ever simple. We have a clock generator here. We have a 2-channel event sequencer. And the event sequencer is wired into the 4 pulses per second, 4 pulses per bar of the clock generator. And the outputs are going to drum synth 1, which you can see here is set to a kick preset, and drum synth 2, you'll have to take my word for it. It was set to a cymbal preset, but I adjusted it a bit so the screen renamed itself because it had been edited. But originally this was, I think, cymbal number 3. So these two are just sent into a simple mixer and into the outputs. So let's turn on the clock gen and hear the little pattern that they're playing. Okay, cool. Simple and effective. So the drum synth in the Nord Micromodular has a velocity input, but it's not really clear what velocity affects, whether it's affecting the tuning, decay, level, or other parameters. That stuff is under the hood, so we can't really tell what it is. I think many of you out there may also own hardware drum machines, analog drum machines. They may have an accent input or a velocity input, but it may not be completely clear to you what exactly that modulates. I've always found that when I work on the drum synths here in the Nord Micromodular, velocity can add a lot of variation, but sometimes it can add a little bit too much. So let me take my example here. If you were watching the last video, you'll recognize this guy. This is a clocked random LFO. It takes the same clock as the sequencer does, and it shoots out random notes that are coordinated to 16th notes in the bar that they're playing. So let's just use this output, like a CV output from the LFO, the clocked LFO, and feed that into the velocity of our hi-hat. So we should get a variation on the hi-hat. You can see the hi-hat is playing various quarter note and eighth note hits. So each time it has a different hit, it should be a little bit different in sound because the velocity should be a little bit different. Let's listen. Here we go. Actually, that was quite a rewarding example because, at least from my point of view, some of those hi-hat hits were just too soft. It's cool that they had variation so that they weren't as boring as they were before, but if some of them are really, really quiet, it's not going to be that musically useful. The problem is that this velocity doesn't have an amount input. It's just you want some velocity to be input, feed it in, but you don't really have control over it. So here's my little trick, which has appeared many times, as I said, in the stream videos. So instead of patching the clocked random LFO directly into the velocity input, I'm going to send it to one channel of a control signal mixer, which is here on the left. It has an amount knob, an inverter, which we don't need, and it can switch to linear mode, which we don't need either. But we're going to take another value here, and this is a constant value. Here it's rated as plus 27. Well, the Nord Micromodular isn't really using voltage. It's a digital synth, so its numbers go from 1 to 128. So 27 here just represents, a low value. If this was on a hardware modular, you might set it to a constant output of 1 or 2 volts. You might be asking me, well, where am I going to get a constant value? There are lots of modules that can do this. Dope-for modules, utility modules often have a constant output, and you can set what that output is probably with a knob from a low to a high amount. I don't own Mass, but I bet Mass can do it. And there should be many other utility modules that should be able to give you a constant voltage of some amount. For example, I bet if you have a disting, you can probably output a constant value, which is adjustable by the knob. So, yeah, you may have to dig a bit deeper. You're not going to find a constant value output on, say, braids or one of your popular mainstream modules. You need a somewhat boring utility module, but you can find it if you look around. So, as I said, the random CV is coming out of here, and I'm going to feed that constant CV to here, and then I have the output, which is mixed here. So basically what that does is, because this is plus 27, and this is a random number from 1 to 128, the lowest number that can ever come out of the control mixer is 27, because 0 plus 27 is 27. If this guy outputs a higher number, like 110, it'll be 110 plus 27 is 137. In fact, the velocity will probably ignore any number over 128. So a number which is too big is not going to be a problem. This will prevent there from being any hits which are too quiet and reducing the musical practicality of the velocity input. So yeah, I mean, as I said, it's a very simple trick, but once you apply it, it becomes very useful. So now we should be able to hear our same little boring pattern. We will hear the hi-hats get louder and softer, but you shouldn't hear any hi-hats which are too quiet to make them practically silent. So let's listen. Okay, so that's kind of a judgment call. To me, that was a successful example. If you thought those hi-hats were still too quiet, you could increase the amount on the constant like this. But what you can't deny is that there's definitely a variation there, which makes this quite useful. And in fact, I would apply this, I'd be careful how I use it. With hi-hats, it's pretty forgiving. If you use it on a kick and a snare, you might end up using a higher constant amount just because a kick which is too quiet will be too weak. A snare would be okay if it was in one of the offbeats, but that's harder to predict. So, yeah, there's other ways you could do it. You could also do, you could take something like this, like a note sequencer, send the same clock signal that the clocked random LFO is setting. Let me just randomize those numbers. And you could send that number to the velocity input instead. And if you saw some numbers were too high or too low for your taste, you could just sort of correct them in your random sequence. Say, oh, this one is too low, so let's dial it back up so you don't have anything which is too down, too low, and too quiet for your purposes. But yeah, there should be more than one way to accomplish these things. Most of us will find it easier or less module hungry to do it this way than to devote a whole sequencer to it. But you figure out whatever's best for you. So yeah, this has been another little quick and dirty tip with Father Moo. Hope you find it useful for building your own patches. And tune in again because we got more tips coming up. Cheers.